Hi, I'm back. My name is Dave Baranek. I was an F-14 Radar Intercept Officer, or RIO. My call sign was BIO. I have 2,500 flight hours in the F-14, and I was also a Top Gun instructor in the mid-1980s. I'm going to tell you about a small mistake I made in planning and executing a flight that could have turned into a big mistake, except for the fortunate, fast thinking of the squadron duty officer. Well, if you've watched any of these videos, you probably know that I've written several books. And in my books, I like to mix up the stories. I tell, bad stories on myself sometimes, but I also make sure I tell good stories so you know that I was a decent RIO. For example, when Jaws and I flew in the Top Gun class and in Rising Fighter and did very well. And then when I was in VF2, flying with Loner in the Tarps Derby and flying in FARP. But sometimes the episodes that really didn't go as planned make the most interesting stories. And so this story happened in 1982. I've checked my logbook. It was probably in June, but I can't pinpoint the exact date. The situation was our squadron, VF-24, flying F-14A Tomcats, had recently returned from a 7.5-month deployment. We were starting to get back to our flying and training a little bit slow, and so we were kind of taking it easy. That was just the normal turnaround routine for an F-14 squadron, at least it was back then. I was scheduled for a low-level flight with Drifty. And back in those days, we flew low levels. We enjoyed them. We stayed on the route because you can get in big trouble for getting off the route. But we didn't worry too much about timing and things like that, which later really changed. I mean, the F-14 community was ensured that we met our time on target to within 5 seconds and things like that. But as I said, this was mainly just, to start to get back up to speed after returning from a long deployment. So one afternoon, Drifty and I were scheduled for a low-level training flight. We were only going to fly at 360 knots, which is a pretty sedate speed in an F-14. Sometimes we flew these low levels at 480 or more. Drifty was a lieutenant commander. He had already had an F-14 squadron tour and I think an F-4 squadron tour, and he'd already been a RAG instructor. So he had a lot of Tomcat experience. We selected our own route, and we picked a low level that would take us through the mountains of Southern California, entering the coast somewhere near Santa Barbara, crossing the mountains, heading roughly northeast and east, and then finishing up in the low level in a valley in the center of Southern California. Now, I've spent some time looking at a Los Angeles sectional chart, and I cannot determine exactly what low level we're flying on. So I wish I could. I would tell you that. So when Drifty and I selected our route, he let me do the flight planning, which was fairly simple. I copied down the latitude and longitude of the waypoints so I could enter them into our inertial nav system. And I filed a flight plan, which was a requirement for this because it was not a local stereotypical route, common route that we flew. So I filed the flight plan and did the necessary, what I thought was the necessary steps. We took off out of Miramar, headed northwest over the Pacific, and then I called Los Angeles Center. We told them we were switching to our low-level altitude, or requested permission to descend to our low-level altitude and switch controlling frequencies, and we entered the route at the appointed start point. It was, as I said, it was a pleasant experience. The INS, the inertial nav system, the INS, was working just fine, and we just, enjoyed a nice, pleasant flight over Southern California and the low mountains. I poked around Google Earth when I was getting ready for this video, and I found a couple of images that indicate what I remember as the scenery that we saw out of our cockpit that day. So we're flying along, turn points. I'm telling him the routes. We're watching for traffic. I mean, we're, of course, careful about all of our safety of flight items. We're following our airspeed, watching traffic, and going from point to point through this low-level route. Finally, we break out of the mountains and come into a valley. And I go, well, Drifty, this is our last waypoint. So we're going to be making a turn to the south to head back to Miramar and climbing. And as we are coming out of the mountains and coming into this big valley, we look off to the left and we see an airfield about 7 or 8 miles away. And we both said, look at that. That must be Edwards Air Force Base. And in my mind, I'm thinking, wow, I didn't think we would get this close to Edwards. But that's okay. It was, we were on the route, and I thought we were doing what we were supposed to do. So we started our climb from, low altitude above ground level, started a climb and a right-hand turn, headed back to Miramar. And as I was preparing to switch to the air traffic control frequency, probably Los Angeles Center low altitude frequency, we hear a call on guard. Guard is the radio frequency that all aircraft are supposed to monitor, and it's for emergency calls and things just like this. And the call was F-14 in a right-hand turn, climbing through 7,000 feet. Contact Edwards approach on, and they gave us a radio frequency. And so I looked at our altimeter. We were climbing through 7,000 feet. We were definitely in a right-hand turn. We were in F-14. They were talking to us. So right away, I said, this is not really a good situation. I dialed up the frequency that they gave us on the radio, and using my most solicitous voice, I said, Edwards approach, this is November Golf 207. We just received a call on guard to call you. Edwards approach, there was nothing solicitous about their tone. They said, November Golf 207, did you, what are you doing here? Did you arrange to fly this route? And I said, we're just leaving whatever the route was, Victor route, India route. I don't remember. I said, we're just leaving this route and RTB Miramar. And Edwards said, November Golf 207, contact Los Angeles Center, and they gave us a frequency. So in my mind, I'm thinking, good, my solicitous voice and pleasant manner must have worked and got us out of this situation. But what Drifty said was, hey, Bio, you didn't contact the coordinating office, did you? And I'm going, no. That made me think back to the effort I'd done in planning this flight. And in Area Planning 1 Bravo, which is the publication that identifies low-level routes and other information around the United States, AP1B, there's a long list of low-level routes, and almost each route at the end has what's called special operating procedures. And it's up to the aircrew to go through those procedures in detail and comply with any requirements. I had contacted the scheduling activity, and that's just, the most basic thing that you do to schedule a low-level route. But for this route that we had flown, there was also a coordinating activity. And I remembered I had seen that, and I just didn't bother to call them. So we're flying home. Again, I think I've gotten us out of this situation. We land back at Miramar, get out, post-flight the jet, write up a couple of gripes about the airplane, get out of our flight gear, and walk up to the ready room. And when we get to the ready room, there's 3 or 4 other pilots and Rios hanging out in the ready room. And as soon as we walk in, they say, what did you guys do? And right away I go, I guess I didn't get us out of the situation. So they go, Gordo is the SDO. So I walk over to the duty desk and I said, Gordo, what happened back here? Because anytime something like this happens, you're in potential trouble. So Gordo, who was one of the pilots in the squadron, of course, he said, Bio, I saved you. He goes, while you were, about 30 minutes ago, while you guys were flying, the phone rang. He answered the phone, Fighter Squadron 24. The person on the other end said, this is Edwards approach. I'd like to talk to the commanding officer. And Gordo, in one of the best examples of thinking quickly that I've ever seen, said, "Speaking." And so the person at Edwards Approach was talking to Lieutenant Gordo, and they think they're talking to the commander of the squadron. So they described what we had done wrong, the fact that we had flown into their airspace without coordination, and they told him, how serious this was. And Gordo, assuming the identity of the commanding officer, said, "Oh, I'll take care of this. I'll make sure that it's dealt with properly." So Gordo didn't actually do anything. He just kept it to himself. He could have told the operations officer or the commanding officer. What would have happened? For something like this, not too much. It would have tarnished my reputation around the squadron a little bit. I knew that I had gotten a cheap lesson, and I kept it in mind in the future when I was planning flights. And later, I actually planned and led some nice flights, including low levels. If you want more stories, there's some on my website, topgunbio.com. And of course, my 3 books are loaded with flying stories of all kinds. Hey, thanks for checking out my Tomcat memories. Cleared and switching.